Welcome to our fourth and final session of early Celtic Christianity. I just wanted to say I've enjoyed making these PowerPoints very much. It's been a fun class for me, and I look forward to speaking with some of you about the content in the near future. There's a lot of depth in this particular session. A lot happens, but it's a lot of fun. It really paints a picture of why things are the way they are. Last week, we talked about how the Celtic peoples of Britain were known as the Britons, and then along came the Germanic tribes known as the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, who pushed the Britons out of modern-day English territory, and they settled in Scotland, Wales, and Cornwall. Afterwards, the Seven Kingdoms were established. We covered St. Oswald and St. Aidan, and talked a little bit about Lindisfarne. We ended with the Synod of Whitby, and that's where I'm going to pick up today. Even though the Celtic people had pretty much moved out, the Church in England was still rooted in the Celtic tradition, despite the fact that Angles and Saxons were kind of running things now, although they certainly had a great influence on tradition and worship in England. Well, now we get to the Synod of Whitby. The Church in England was independent from papal authority from the beginning. Even after Augustine of Canterbury came and discovered it in 596-7, it remained independent until the Synod of Whitby in AD 664. At this council, they were debating whether or not the Church would remain Celtic or take up Roman traditions. King Oswy, the current king of Northumbria, chose to abandon the Ionian in favor of the Roman Church. Of course, Rome was pushing to come in and take over anyway, and King Oswy was all for it. The chief point of dispute was Easter Day, which both parties held upon different dates. This very issue was going to cause the church to split into two different groups, but King Oswy's decision ended that possibility. The Church in England submitted to papal rule, ending its independence. I'm sure Pope Gregory I was absolutely thrilled. This was a vital turning point in the development of the Church in England. Now, let's focus for a minute on the land in the north, Scotland. Like all of Britain, Scotland was divided. There were different tribes of people. The two big tribes in Scotland were the Picts and the Gaels, each one having its own ruler. Well, the Norse people in the far north, or more popularly known as the Vikings, had been attacking Scotland off and on. The Picts had been weakened by incursions from the Vikings and Irish tribes, who, under Fergus More, had settled in the area of Argyll. No one knows for sure, but it's believed by many historians that the Gaels were originally from Ireland, and that they came over around AD 500 and helped Fergus More conquer Argyll from the Picts. Fast forward to the 9th century, a man of royal descent named Kenneth MacAlpin rose up and helped the people of the north fight against the Vikings. This was probably around the 840s. By doing this, Kenneth MacAlpin brought some unification between the Gaels and the Picts to found a united kingdom of Alba, which is Gaelic for Scotia, known eventually as Scotland. To go into a little further explanation, the world Kenneth MacAlpin inhabited was complicated, and the idea of a country called Scotland did not yet exist, of course. When the Romans left Britain in 410, they left a power vacuum which in modern-day Scotland contained four key kingdoms: Picts, Scots, Britons, and Saxons. The Picts were the resident Celtic peoples in North and Northeast Scotland. The Scots were Irish settlers in the kingdom of Dalriada in western Scotland. The Britons, the native southerners pushed up to the southwest of Scotland. And the Saxons, the new power in England, pushing into southeast Scotland by the kingdom of Northumbria. After a topsy-turvy few hundred years, The Picts emerged as the dominant power at the start of the 9th century and showed signs of forming a larger centralized state. However, this was thrown into yet more turmoil by the arrival of the Vikings. Initially, these were just raiding parties, sacking coastal areas and the Scottish islands, particularly monasteries like Iona, which proved both easy and rich targets. However, they soon started to push further inland, and in 839, the Picts lost a disastrous battle in which their king and basically all of the effective key royal males, his sons and brothers, were killed. Long story short, Kenneth MacAlpin showed tremendous leadership. Him, along with many Picts and Gaels, fought against the Vikings. Known today as Kenneth I, he's traditionally looked at as the founder of medieval Scotland and its first king. First king of a united Scotland, that is. Now, there's a chance that Kenneth I's war against the Vikings is only a myth, and that he mainly just fought against the Saxons. Good records from those days are hard to come by, since the Vikings were sacking monasteries. Much written history was destroyed. That's why we have to rely on tradition and legend to kind of fill in the gaps. So it was either Vikings or Saxons Kenneth fought against. Either way, the tribes of Scotland liked him, enough to accept him as king. So we've covered the Synod of Whitby in the 7th century and the birth of a united Scotland in the 9th century. Now it's time to move on to another great turning point in British history, the Norman Conquest, which began in 1066 and ended in 1075. The Normans were conquerors. I suppose it was in their blood since their ancestors were Vikings. In France, the Duke of Normandy, who became known in history as William the Conqueror, led armies of Norman, Breton, Flemish, and French soldiers in a great conquest to occupy England. Those native Brits just can't catch a break, can they? Oh, the humanity. St. Edward the Confessor, who was among the last Anglo-Saxon kings of England and last king of the House of Wessex, died in January of 1066. When this happened, his brother-in-law, Harold Godwinson, succeeded the throne. The Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada, invaded northern England in September 1066 and was victorious at the Battle of Fulford, but Godwinson's army defeated and killed Hardrada at the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September 25th. Within days, William the Conqueror landed in southern England. Godwinson marched south to oppose him, leaving a good portion of his army in the north. He and his troops fought William's army in the Battle of Hastings and was defeated. William the Conqueror became King William I of a united England, the first Norman king and the beginning of a whole new era. No more divisions. No more different rulers of individual tribes. From there on out, England was ruled by one Norman ruler. The nobles and all of the elite, for the most part, were Norman. They even had their own language, French, or a certain dialect of French, known simply as Norman French. Anglo-Saxons were looked down upon by the Normans, who regarded them as lesser. To the Normans, all those native tribes of Britain were lower-class peasants. It wasn't just England the Normans conquered, of course. They conquered pretty much all of Europe. Kings and nobles were of Norman blood. This is why whenever kings of different countries would meet, like the King of England and France would meet, or England and Scotland, they would oftentimes greet each other by saying, "cousin," because they all shared common ancestry. Evidently, it wasn't uncommon for inbreeding to occur in royal marriages because of this fact. William's house, the House of Normandy, which was an actual royal house, lasted until 1154, when the House of Plantagenet came to power. which was a house originating from Anjou, France. The Plantagenets consisted of two main branches, the House of Lancaster and the House of York. The Plantagenets remained on the throne of England for years, until 1485, when Richard III was defeated by Henry Tudor, who became Henry VII after taking the throne, putting an end to the Plantagenet reign. So anyway, back to the Norman Conquest. Now we have a united England ruled by one king and a Roman church. Because the church in England was now Roman, and had been for some time, this doesn't mean the king always kissed the feet of popes. Not at all. There was constant push and shove between the English king and the Pope. That's why Henry II made his best friend Thomas Becket Archbishop of Canterbury, because he wanted to have better control of the church in England. Unfortunately for Henry, Becket found Christ during his time as Archbishop and therefore refused to cater to all of Henry's desires. So Henry had him assassinated. Whether he actually gave the order or not has always been debatable, but it was his responsibility nonetheless. But this is an example of the tension between the kings of England and the Pope in Rome. And this is important to know because now we take a look at the next two kings. After the death of Henry II in 1189, his son Richard, known in history as Richard the Lionheart, succeeded the throne. Now we have two brothers who played a vital role in English history, Richard and John, with John succeeding Richard after he died. Medieval monks portrayed King John as an evil monster. In the classic tale of Robin Hood, King John, or Prince John in the more popular version, was the villain. He sat on the throne and ran the country like a tyrant, while his brother, King Richard, was away in Israel. John was hated and Richard was loved. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there's a good chance that is fiction only. Modern historians say it was Richard who was the swine. He was never home during his reign due to fighting in the Crusades, and he spent up all the money in the treasury on these crusades. Some historians refer to him as Richard the Wretched instead of the Lionheart, while portraying John as an energetic king who tried to increase his power in a difficult circumstance. In a nutshell, King Richard was never home, as I previously stated. He spent a good portion of his kingship overseas in the Holy Land fighting. Because of this, he gave authority to different noblemen to kind of help run things during his absence. These noblemen became known as the barons. Barons were nobles given power by the king. Fast forward, after Richard's death, his younger brother John took the throne. Well, Richard kind of made things tough for John. You see, Richard gave power to the barons, and once that kind of power is given, it's hard to take it back. John tried, and he ultimately failed. I'll explain this. King John had to do some things that made him quite unpopular with the barons. He collected taxes, modernized the government, and exerted his power over the church, Scotland, and Ireland. Between 1201 and 1202, helped by King Philip of France, the lords of Lusignan, a powerful alliance of French nobles, rebelled against John. John mounted a huge campaign to reconquer Normandy, but was badly defeated at the Battle of Bouvines in 1214. John was forced to pay the huge sum of 20,000 marks and concede some lands in France in order for King Philip to recognize him as the heir to Richard I. This was really not good for John at all. John was exposed as diplomatically weak. The reign of King John shows just what often happened in the Middle Ages when a monarch lost a war. His authority was completely undermined. After this war, the barons rebelled, and on the 15th of June, 1215, they forced John to agree to the signing of the Great Charter, known as the Magna Carta. This charter was a set of demands by which the barons tried to limit the power of the king to their advantage. And this was the beginning of the end of the absolute monarchy in England and the birth of the constitutional monarchy. Richard gave power to the barons, and the barons never gave it back. They forced John to sign the Magna Carta, stating that the power of the king from then on would be limited. This was a major turning point in English government. The barons, successfully, had said no to the king and made him do as they wanted. No monarch of England ever had absolute power again, and within a century, England saw the beginnings of Parliament. This is fascinating history, Father Fitzhugh, but what does any of this have to do with the subject matter of this class? Well, that's a great question. You see, I mentioned before that the English Church didn't fall under papal rule until the Synod of Whitby. Well, there was a clause written in the Magna Carta signed by King John that mentioned the English Church's freedom. First, that we have granted to God, and by the present charter have confirmed for us and our heirs in perpetuity, that the English Church shall be free, and shall have its rights undiminished and its liberties unimpaired. That we wish this so to be observed appears from the fact that of our own free will, before the outbreak of the present dispute between us and our barons, we granted and confirmed by charter the freedom of the Church's elections, a right reckoned to be of the greatest necessity and importance to it, and caused this to be confirmed by Pope Innocent III. This freedom we shall observe ourselves, and desire to be observed in good faith by our heirs in perpetuity. Then again, another clause stated near the very end. It is accordingly our wish and command that the English Church shall be free, and that men in our kingdom shall have and keep all these liberties, rights, and concessions, well and peaceably in their fullness and entirety for them and their heirs, of us and our heirs, in all things and all places forever. Fast forward to the 16th century during the reign of Henry VIII. He was trying to get an annulment from Catherine of Aragon. Henry charged his advisor, Thomas Cromwell, to find something that could give him legal cause to separate the English Church from Rome. Thomas Cromwell used these clauses in the Magna Carta as a way of legally breaking away from Roman authority, stating that the English Church started out independent and never should have fallen under the authority of the Pope in the first place. So Henry VIII took the Church in England out of the authority of the Pope and brought it under his authority. That was something that was new. So instead of allowing the monasteries to handle the English Church, as it was before the Council of Whitby, Henry took it upon himself to be the head of the Church of England, comparing himself to King David being the head of the Israelites, with David being the one who speaks to God and shepherds his people. No outside source interfering. Here's where people start to get confused. The only thing Henry did was put himself as head of the church. He did not become a Protestant. He changed absolutely nothing. The only thing he did was dissolve the monasteries because he needed the money for the land. But that was it. He remained Catholic, as did the Church of England, despite the fact that Archbishop Thomas Cranmer was a Protestant at heart and a reformer. But Cranmer couldn't voice that. In fact, towards the end of his reign, Henry passed the 6 Articles of 1539, which meant the church remained Catholic. Protestants who denied the Catholic faith were persecuted and even burned. I'm sure there was a giant part of Cranmer that was thrilled when Henry died, because that's when he started pushing for reform. But that's a different subject for a different class. English religious history is quite complex, but good to know if you wish to apply some concrete understanding to Anglicanism. It was St. Bede who first articulated the idea of the English people. In 732, he wrote his History of the English Church and People, in which he treated the inhabitants of lowland Britain whether Saxons, Jutes, or Angles, as one English nation. He traces the name back to a tale from the 590s. The story goes that Pope Gregory the Great saw some fair-haired and fair-skinned slaves in a slave market in Italy, and was told that they were Angles. "Not Angles, but angels," he replied. It was a lovely pun, and somehow created an idea, which one senses in St. Bede, that the English Church were a chosen race. Since then, the English have always been the English, because St. Bede said so. Even though the Celtic Church is only a memory, the Church of England's roots are still Celtic. And although Scottish, Irish, and Welsh Christianity bears a much stronger resemblance to the early Celtic culture, naturally, it's never completely gone away in England either, and I don't feel it ever could. It's part of what has shaped the Church of England. Well, thank you all for joining me. I enjoyed this class very much, and I look forward to some Q&A in the near future. Until then, I'm Father Fitzhugh, ending our class with this ancient Celtic prayer. Thanks to you, O God, that I have risen today, to the rising of life itself. May it be to your own glory, O God of every gift, and to the glory of my soul likewise. O great God, aid my soul with the aiding of your own mercy. Even as I clothe my body with wool, cover my soul with the shadow of your wing. Help me to avoid every sin, and the source of every sin to forsake. And as the mist scatters on the crest of the hills, may each ill haze clear from my soul, O God. God's blessings, everyone.